Hello and welcome to the program. I am Adeshewa Josh. Let's take you through major headlines around the world, and we have to start with the ongoing crisis between Russia and Ukraine. Russia has pledged to adopt a beefed-up new military doctrine over NATO's plans to establish a rapid response force in the wake of the rebellion in Ukraine's east, according to a top Russian official. Mikhail Popov, a senior Russian security official, he says that the fact that the military infrastructure of the NATO member states is getting closer to the Russian borders will preserve its place as one of the external threats for the Russian Federation. The Russian reaction came a day after the NATO chief said that the alliance will respond to the Ukraine crisis by creating a spearhead rapid reaction force, potentially including several thousands of troops that could be sent to a hotspot in as little as 2 days. He named the U.S. missile defense plans and the Ukraine crisis as other dangers to Russia's security. Now, a recent report by Amnesty International shows Islamic State militants have been carrying out a wave of ethnic cleansing in northern Iraq. The human rights group said it has irrefutable evidence and that its fighters have been committing war crimes, including mass summary killings and abductions against ethnic and religious minorities. Reports say Duncan Spina, the head of Iraq for the International Commission for Missing Persons, has revealed that the Iraqi government has asked for suspected mass graves to be investigated. There's an allegation that between 800 and 1,700 people were murdered by Islamic State, IS, and placed in shallow graves.
Amnesty International today released a report suggesting it found evidence of ethnic cleansing in northern Iraq as Islamic State moves to wipe out minorities. Amnesty says the evidence it uncovered indicates that members of the armed group IS have launched a systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing in northern Iraq, carrying out war crimes, including mass summary killings and abductions against ethnic and religious minorities. For the report, Amnesty interviewed a number of refugees and said their accounts point towards IS systematic targeting minorities in northern Iraq. Amnesty has gathered evidence that several mass killings took place in Sinjar in August. Two of the deadliest incidents took place when IS fighters raided the villages of Quinye on August the 3rd and Kosho on 15th of August. The number of those killed in these villages alone runs into hundreds. Groups of men and boys, including children as young as 12 from those villages, were seized by IS militants, taken away and shot. Whereas Erdin, a refugee, recounted IS abducting hundreds, possibly thousands, of women and children, along with scores of men from the Yazidi minority. He told Amnesty 45 women and children from his family were abducted on August the 3rd in Quinye, where some 60 to 70 men, dozens of them his relatives, were also massacred. Most of them women, girls, and small children. We ran towards the mountain. IS came and separated the women and children from the men. They killed all the men and took all the women and children to Tal Afar. Some of the girls are held with the rest of the family, and some are unaccounted for. This is the list of those abducted. The first is Shirin and 44 others. Among them, old women. Gozal is 85 years old. This is Alina. She was abducted and her dad, Faisal, was killed. She is now with the hands of IS. She, her mother, and little sister. Donatella Rivera, Amnesty International Senior Crisis Response Advisor currently in northern Iraq, says the massacres and abductions being carried out by the Islamic State provide harrowing new evidence that a wave of ethnic cleansing against minorities is sweeping across northern Iraq. She said IS was carrying out despicable crimes and had transformed rural areas of Sinjar into blood-soaked killing fields in its brutal campaign to perpetrate all trace of non-Arabs and non-Sunni Muslims. The fate of most of the hundreds of Yazidis abducted and held captive by the Islamic State remains unknown. According to Amnesty, Many of those held by IS have been threatened with rape or sexual assault or pressured to convert to Islam. In some cases, entire families have been abducted.
VOA's Jeff Young joins us now via telephone to talk more on this matter. Thanks a lot for joining us on the program.
Pleasure.
Now, Amnesty International obviously has irrefutable proof that Islamic militant IS has committed ethnic cleansing in northern Iraq. What more can you tell us about this?
Now we have traction on this. Amnesty International, of course, is an important global human rights advocacy group. But what has happened in the last 24 hours, Flavia Pansieri, who is the United Nations Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, has announced that the United Nations is going to send investigative teams into Iraq to look into not just atrocities by the Islamic State, but atrocities by any faction within the state of Iraq. And according to that, Flavia, this also includes allegations of atrocities committed by government forces, government of Iraq forces against others. So the UN is definitely sending in a team, and they will begin an investigation shortly and try to come up with a report that shows who has committed what offenses and what to go from there.
All right. Now, this appears to be the first time that IS will be indicted on this scale. Will this deter or curb, as the case may be, IS operations in the region?
I think if you were to talk to many analysts who follow this closely, you would come up with the collective opinion that ISIS isn't really worried about the public square. It isn't really worried that it is perceived as murderous or that its adventures are bloodthirsty. It is into power and control, according to the analysts who look at this. ISIS will do as it sees fit if it exerts power and if it maintains control. Being indicted by the International Criminal Court, for instance, at The Hague, for atrocities against humanity, to most officials, that's not going to deter them at all. They have their battle plan, and so far, it's working.
Well, now, there appears to be more to worry about. A militant group reportedly affiliated to the Taliban in Afghanistan says they are considering joining forces with IS. Now, what kind of security threat are we looking at if this merger ever pulls through?
If it is a group that's already within Afghanistan, and all they're doing is simply declaring their alliance and allegiance with the Islamic State, with ISIS, then I don't really see any additional contribution to the battle stage in Afghanistan. I should say other observers would not find that there would be any great contribution by just an alliance. If hypothetically, according to these people, the Islamic State were to send plane loads of fighters into Afghanistan to join that fight, then that would alter the balance in Afghanistan. But simply declaring an alliance or an allegiance doesn't necessarily, according to observers, raise any significant concerns about additional security threats.
Thanks a lot. VOA's Jeff Young speaking to us live from Washington. Thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts. Now let's bring this back home a little bit. We're being joined via telephone also by Professor Isaac Mbachu from the Department of Political and Strategic Studies from the Nigeria Defense Academy. Thanks a lot for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, what kind of threat could the Islamic State militant pose to Nigeria?
It's very serious strategic threat to Nigeria because in the final analysis, ISIS is linked up with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, El-Shabaab, and of course, Boko Haram. So this is a potent strategic threat, not only to Nigeria, but the whole of Africa.
Now, I haven't mentioned this. Obviously, it appears that IS is recruiting across board. Should we be worried about collaborations between Boko Haram and IS? And what should be done to prevent that from happening?
Very nice. First of all, IS recruits from Britain, recruit from Germany, recruit from USA, from Belgium, from France, and of course, recruiting from Africa. Number one is Nigeria. Recruiting from Libya, from Egypt. The best thing that the international community can do is to team up. Team up in what the U.S. calls the coalition of the willing. Team up and defeat ISIS. If ISIS is not defeated at this time, if ISIS is allowed to see Syria and Iraq, it will be very, very dangerous to contemplate. That is, I mean, it will be very difficult to dislodge them if they are not dislodged right now from Iraq and Syria. And the best way to dislodge them is to agree with the Assad, in fact, because the enemy of your enemy is your enemy. And in the final analysis, the only thing that is constant is your national interest. Okay? So ISIS is a very serious threat of the 21st century and must be dealt with accordingly.
Okay, now we're seeing so much collaborations across board from the Middle East to the United States and to Europe. Tell us, what is the goal of Afghan Taliban joining forces with the IS?
Hello? Hello?
If you can hear me, let me repeat the question.
Yes. Please repeat the question.
It is obvious that there are collaborations across board. What do you think the goal is with the Afghan Taliban joining forces with Islamic State militants?
Okay. Hello. I was saying before that the enemy of your enemy is your is your friend. Now, Afghanistan is already an albatross in fact, not only for the West, but for the whole world. If ISIS should join hands with the Taliban in Afghanistan, with Al-Shabaab in the Horn of Africa, with Boko Haram in West Africa, in Nigeria, with Akim, that is Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, that means the global war on terrorism is lost. So the best thing is to neutralize, first of all, neutralize ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. Why ISIS should be neutralized is that ISIS is already claiming to be a caliphate, claiming to be a state. And in fact, it is already a state within a state. So the best, before you talk of Taliban in Afghanistan, Al-Shabaab in Horn of Africa, Boko Haram in Nigeria, Akim in the Maghreb, ISIS should be there to be. So if ISIS is not neutralized in Iraq and in Syria, Saudi Arabia will not be safe. Iran will not be safe. The Gulf states, in fact, the oil land, the vital land for the West, the vital land for strategic land, oil land, will be lost.
Thank you so much, Professor Isaac Mbachu.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Professor Isaac Mbachu for us there from the Department of Political and Strategic Studies from the Nigerian Academy. We'll take a short break now. When we come back, we're still talking security. Bama town in Borno State in northern Nigeria falls to the hands of Boko Haram. We have details when we come back, so join us again.